Hello guys, TKC here. So today I got a really interesting topic to talk about, and I got reminded about it from a user on YouTube by the name of KrAzYxArCaDe. And he comes from a Magic the Gathering background, and he was wondering why most decks that you see in Kaijudo or Duel Masters have more cards in the deck than the limit, which is 40 cards. So you can see a lot of decks that go up until like 44 or 46 or 48, or even decks that go up above 50 to like 60 even. So just like KrAzYxArCaDe, I also come from a background of other trading card games. Most specifically Yu-Gi-Oh, but I've also followed the Magic the Gathering scene. So I've been here and there, and I've been seeing how they build decks. And so in Yu-Gi-Oh, the limit is 40 as well, but you could go over. And I usually see 40 card decks no matter what, sometimes the occasional 41 card deck. And in Magic, the limit is 60 cards because of the fact that you need to play lands to cast your spells. And so when you have a deck with that ginormous size, you kind of don't want to go over to 61. There's really no point. You want to be sure you hit your lands, and so you can drop the lands and tap them and play your spells, because they're a lot harder to play spells in that game because of the, slightly complicated mana costs on the cards as compared to Kaijudo, which does have some basic fundamentals that are quite similar to Magic. However, it's just simply tap this many cards, play it, and with the new mana rule, it's even easier to play cards. Now, in Duel Masters and Kaijudo, people tend to go over the 40 card limit quite often, and they're most prominent in, I would say, control decks. The thing with control decks is that they are very grindy. They're very slow. They want to build up to the optimal board presence and even hand presence, so you have good advantage like everywhere, and then once you have that advantage, you just go in for the kill. And so with those decks, they want the game to go into endgame, and it could actually happen that you deck yourself out by playing such a long game. So playing 40 card decks is quite risky in a metagame where control decks are quite prominent, because if there's going to be a lot of control decks floating around, then deck outs would occur more frequently if you would play a smaller deck. Now, that's not really the only reason why it goes that far. There are a couple other reasons as well. I think the reason that I am most supporting of why we play more cards is the fact that you start off with 5 shields at the very beginning of the game. See, the thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that even though it also has the 40 card limit, you only draw 6 cards at the start of the game. You don't set 5 shields and then draw 5, or if you're second, draw 6. So, if you're going second, your deck is bewhittled already to 29 cards if you use a 40 card deck. So that pretty much means you only have 29 turns in a duel to win. Now that is actually plenty, but that is also putting aside the fact there are a lot of draw cards in the game, and even mill, but that really won't be happening too often because mill is really not that strong yet. So if you're going to be playing a control deck with a lot of draw cards, most typically in the 15 or 12 to 18 card range, where you're going to be using those cards to search, to draw, to do a lot of different things, you're going to be decking yourself out really quickly. So by playing more cards in your control deck, you actually kind of protect yourself against the inevitable deck out in the control mirror. Now, here's another really interesting reason. Because you set those 5 shields, that is actually a 5 out of 40 chance that one of your important cards in your deck is going to be in your shields. So, for example, in a control deck, what it usually has is a lot of advantage generating cards, a lot of 1-for-1 cards, and then the big guys, the big boom boom pow, bam, right to the shields, win the game kind of cards, like the finishers, so like Dark Sky Adorable, Bolt-Tailed Dragon, Tatsuyan the Unchained, Morn of the Vengeful, things like that. It packs, I guess it depends on the deck, but it could be anywhere from 2 to 3 to even 7 or so finishers in a deck. And so the less you have, the more higher of a chance that your deck doesn't even have finishers in the deck at all. And by doing that, you kind of lose your win condition, kind of. Then again, it depends what kind of matchup you play against. If you play against the control matchup, you're pretty much screwed, because you're not going to be losing shields too often, except for maybe Aqua Seneschals and Razor Hides and cards like that going in for attacks just to get the +1. But if you're going to be playing against Russian aggro, I guess you're in the clear, because then it doesn't really matter at that point, because they're going to be attacking your shields and you're going to be getting your finishers mid to late game, and so you really won't be scared of that. But like I've said so many times already, it's the control mirror that really pushes the higher amount of cards in a deck. But in addition to that, it also really depends, because control decks like to have a lot of different options, and when you have a 40 card deck that places 5 shields down, and you draw 5, you don't really have too many options going. Like, you won't be guaranteed to get all the cards you need. So in a control deck, it wants to have a lot of different options at its disposal, and if you're going to be playing 40 cards only, you're going to be doing a lot of techs and a lot of things that you would rather play more of. However, Duel Masters in Japan is still going on, and they're fine with their 40 card limit, because in Japan, they actually have a rule where you have to run 40 cards, no higher, no lower. It's a really interesting rule, but I guess they're completely fine with it. It's just, it promotes better deck building, I guess, but at the same time, I feel that it kind of hurts control a bit, because it forces you to play a lot of one-ofs and of cards that you would rather play 2 of so you could get them more often. And so that's why in the Japanese meta, the fast decks are always the best decks. And then there are the occasional kind of control decks, but even then they still rely on those really fast hyperspatial creatures as their pseudo finishers. What this really means is that if you were able to have more cards than 40, your control deck would be a lot better. You would have a lot more options, and you wouldn't have to rely on those pseudo-finisher hyperspatial creatures. You could splash into a bunch of different things. Another really key thing that control decks really like to utilize is search. And so in Kaijudo right now, we have 2 really awesome cards that do that in Crystal Memory and Gigahorn Charger. And so if you have cards like that, it actually allows you to play a lot of these 1-ofs and 2-ofs, because you could simply just play those and then search what you're looking for. There are tons of 5,000 or more power creatures that are really useful in control decks. You mainly want to be getting the finishers. You get like Dark-Scarred Orbital and all those other cards I mentioned, but you could also get some neat utility cards like King Coral to bounce all the level 4s or less, and then Crystal Memory, allowing you to search any card in your deck, is simply incredible. You would think that because you could search any card, you would be wanting to get spells more often, because Gigahorn Charger could only search high-powered creatures, but it really isn't the case too often. I mean, Crystal Memory, it really depends on the situation. Sometimes you're in a bind, you really need that blocker to save yourself, or sometimes you're just like, oh, I'm looking good, I'm going to go for cards that make me win the game. So for everyone wondering why some decks out there have a lot more than 40 cards, maybe you know the reason now. It's mainly because of control decks being worried about decking out and having more options at their disposal, and pretty much just avoiding having to use a lot of techs that they would rather not want to do when they could run more cards. More options at your disposal, it gives you more targets for your search cards, your draw cards won't deck you out. There's just a lot of things that control is worried about in the mirror anyways. Rush decks, however, they really should stay at 40, because they don't really have much deck manipulation going. They just want to win with fast creatures consistently, and to do that you need the minimum size deck to make the deck consistent and play off your turns the way you want it to most often, like the turn 1 Blaze Belcher, turn 2 Drakon Weaponsmith, turn 3 Laser Arm Drakon, turn 4 Comet Missile and another one, or something like that. You want to have some awesome kind of line of play, and to do that you need to have a really short deck. Same thing applies for combo-oriented decks. Like, I would say Hyperspeed Dragon and Lepidus decks are very combo-oriented. Hyperspeed, you want to get the Hyperspeed play off, then you want to play a Dragon next turn, and another Dragon, and then evolve Evo Fury Tatsurion. You have a lot of combos going on there that are very, precise, and you want it to happen in a duel. Same thing for Lepidus. Lepidus, you want to get Lepidus on the board, you want to have big creatures, you want to tap stuff, or you want to attack untapped creatures. That's what Lepidus does. So combo decks like that, they kind of need to stay at 40 if you want to be able to consistently use those combos. And then the remaining decks are like aggro, ramp, control, all those kinds of decks. Those decks don't really worry too much about the consistency of like the line of plays, because it's very open-ended. You could do a lot of different things, and so that's why Aggro decks tend to be around the 44 card area because you could just sneak in some additional cards that you'd really like to have in certain matchups. And aggro, you know, still likes to use Gigglehorn Charger, so you could have some really neat techs with powerful creatures, you know. Like, you really want, let's say, I don't know, like a Chainlash Tatsurion would be an interesting example. It's like, oh, I actually have a powerful creature on board that could get rid of one of their threats by attacking untapped, you know, let's just go grab this. You know, there's just a lot of interesting things you could do in those kinds of decks. And then there's Control, which wants to have as many options as possible, and because literally a third of your deck is Draw Power or Search, you would kind of need to have more cards in your deck or else you will deck out. And like I said before, it allows you to kind of scope out cards that you need in certain situations using Crystal Memory and Gigglehorn Charger. So, I hope that answers your question. There was really a lot of things, a lot of reasons. It's really hard to put on paper or just put like into a single straight thought. There's just a really strategical kind of reason why control decks want to have more cards, and I sure hope that, you know, a couple of my reasons that I've thrown in here kind of give you a certain idea of why those decks have more than 40 cards, like a lot more. However, if there are any experienced Duel Masters players out there, you could probably answer that question a lot better than I can. So if you can, in the comments, maybe you just throw in your reasonings behind why control decks in Duel Masters, or even now in Kaijudo, have a lot more cards. I'd like to hear your input because you guys have a lot more experience than I do. You know, I didn't really get to play too much Duel Masters, and I learned a lot through videos and articles around the internet. Yeah, I'm not the most reliable source ever, but I do have somewhat of an intermediate kind of understanding of what's going on. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed that. I actually have a couple video duels recorded this week, and I'll probably upload one of those this weekend, and maybe another one if I get another one with Ryu Felix at League. Have a great weekend. This is TKC signing off. See you later, guys.